So welcome back to Gabriel Aguiar Prod, and today we are going to see some stylized fire in Godot. Welcome to the first tutorial of visual effects in Godot, as requested by many people in these last few weeks. And the purpose of this video is to show you in a beginner-friendly way how to use the particle system in Godot, and how to use the visual shader, and to make all of these things work together and create these kind of fires. It was really fun to explore Godot, and I just wanna say that these videos are possible thanks to my patrons. Thank you very much for enabling me to give you free tutorials, free education. Links below, this project is also there, as well as many others. And without further ado, let's jump right into this. You can see I've already done 3 versions of this. We are more specifically going to create the red one, with some smoke, with some embers and some flames flying around. And before we move on, I think it's worth mentioning that I have a world environment, which is basically post-processing effects, mostly a glow, so we can have that nice bloom, and some volumetric fog. Right, so let me just hide these 3 fires, and we essentially want to start with an empty node. So on this plus sign I'm gonna add a node 3D, which is going to be the parent of all the particle systems we are going to need. It's a good practice. I'm going to press double click or F2 to rename this to VFX_fire02_red. And now with right click we can add a child node. And in here we can search for particles or GPU. We want to start with the GPU particle 3D. Yes, there's also a CPU particle 3D, by the way. And I was surprised by this, I must admit, actually. So GPU particle 3D, we can rename this with F2, it's gonna be for a static flame. Cool thing about this is that we have these warnings telling us what's missing for this node. And essentially there's a mesh missing in the draw passes, and we need a material to process the particles. It is a little bit confusing at first. So for the process material we have this section right here. If we open this, and by clicking on the empty we see this drop down menu where we can create a particle process material. And if you click again on the particle process material, you will open up essentially the particle system, or a part of it. And another thing that was missing was in the draw passes. 1 is enough, and if you click here you can assign a mesh. And in most particle systems we use a quad as a mesh. It comes by default, which is used a lot of times to create a billboard. And if we move around, as you can see now we have everything we need, and the particle system starts emitting particles. Another very important thing is in geometry the material override, which is essentially where we are going to assign our material. We are going to get there in a moment. And you may be wondering, why is this falling down? Why is this going always down? Well, it's essentially because of this module, the gravity module. We can set it to 0. Let's imagine that we want something static, we can set this to 0. And up here, we can control the rate, the amount of particles it's gonna spawn. We can say 1. 1 particle is enough for a static flame, and if we open time, we can say the lifetime, for example, is 5 seconds. And now that we have our static quad, let's take care of the flame part, and we can go down here to the material override and we want to create new shader material. And on shader, which is set to empty, we can create a new shader, and in here we can say the type is visual shader, spatial mode, and then we can save this. I'm going to save this to my shaders folder and I'm going to call it Fire Shader Tutorial. And then press create, and here we go. Cool thing is, if you select this Fire Shader Tut, down here you have this Shader Editor button, which will open this, well, Visual Shader Editor. If you come from Unity, this is essentially Shader Graph. If you come from Unreal Engine, it's the Material Editor. And it's super useful. We have a lot of options in here by default. Up here we have the Vertex function, the Fragment function, and Light function. Let's focus on the Fragment one for now. And the way we add nodes is with right click. And if we start with the most common node, which is the texture node, we have down here the text2d parameter. We can call it the main text. This is gonna be for our main text. And we only have one output, which is to sample this texture. If we drag a line from here, it suggests that we can create a text2d, which yes, we want indeed. And well, from now on, if you have some experience with node-based shaders, it all becomes a little bit more friendly. For example, we can connect this color to the albedo. And if we drag a line from here, we can search for decompose. We want to decompose a vector of 4. Because this color outputs 4 parameters, x, y, z, w. And we want to connect w, which is essentially the transparency, to the alpha output. This saves automatically, by the way, which is awesome. And in our material override, we already have these shader parameters with our main text ready to receive our texture. By the way, on the description you will find a link with textures that I made available for you to follow this tutorial. So I'm gonna drag and drop this Flame01 texture. And here we go, that's a beginning. But if I go up here to the color and try to change it, nothing really happens. And that's essentially because this shader cannot communicate with the color of the particle system. Fortunately, it's a very easy fix. If when we add a node we search for color, we get this down here input color of the fragment function, which essentially gives us access to the color of each vertex. And then it's all a matter of multiplying this with the texture. Make sure it's a multiply of vector 4, this pink one, and then replace the connections, one to the albedo and the other one to the vector decompose, so the alpha works properly. And then if you test the color, as you can see, it's working alright. And I'm gonna put here on the raw section values that I have already saved, which is 4 for the R, the red channel, 1.25 for the green channel, and 0.6 for the blue channel. And we get this red, yellow color. But if I rotate this around, as you can see, if I look around, this is only a quad facing always the same direction. And the way we create a billboard here in Godot is actually very interesting in my opinion. We don't control that on the particle system, we control that on the shader. In the vertex function up here, down here in the output we have the model view matrix. And if by chance you search for billboard, you will get the billboard matrix node, which is exactly what we need for this. You can connect this to the orange output. And here we go. The static flame follows the camera everywhere, it's a billboard. But on the scale, this doesn't work, as you can see. Because on this get billboard matrix node, we have a keep scale boolean that we want to turn on. This way we can control the scale freely, however we want. Good. I actually find it very funny, how do we create a billboard in Godot for a particle system? Let's switch back to the fragment function, because now let's imagine that we want to make this a little bit less static. We want to animate this and add some dissolve. So let's select the text2d parameter and the text2d node, Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V to create a duplicate, and this text2d parameter is going to be for the dissolve texture. And this is going to be super simple. All we gotta do is multiply the main texture with the dissolve texture and replace the connection up here. And if in our material override we drag and drop the Voronoi noise that I've also added to the pack of textures, this is what we get. Now, wouldn't it be cool if we could control how much we want to dissolve this? Well, if you search for a lerp node, which is a linear interpolation, you won't find anything. In here in Godot it's a mix. Make sure it's a mix for a vector 4. We can connect the main texture without dissolving to the A, and then the result of multiplying the main texture with the dissolved texture to the B, and replace these up here. And now the weight will control how much we want to blend between A and B, meaning that if we control this with a float parameter, call it dissolve amount, we're gonna turn on default value enable. Let's leave it at 0, and we can say that this is a range between 0 and 1. because 0 is no dissolve and 1 is totally dissolved. Connect to the weight, and that's it. That's pretty much it. Let me just arrange this a little bit. But what really matters is that if now you go to the shader parameters on your material override, we have the dissolve amount, and we can control that directly in our particle system. Pretty cool. We have this UV input on the texture 2D, on the sampler, to show you how you can scroll this, how you can pan. And if we go search for UV, you will find a few things, but we have down here UV panning and UV scaling, two functions that come already. Let's go with the UV panning and connect this to the UV, and this offset input will control the panning itself, the scrolling. And we can, with a vector2 parameter, control that in the particle system. Let's call this the dissolve speed, with default values enabled. In this case they are actually going to be 0. And if we connect this to the offset, we don't want to do this manually, right? We need to automate this. So back to our shader, we have another node, very famous among shader editors, which is the time variable. And now it's all a matter of multiplying the time. Make sure you use a vector2 with the dissolve speed parameter, and then replace the connection to offset, and that's it. Now in the inspector you have dissolve speed, for example a value of 0.4 or 0.2, something slow for the flames. Now wouldn't it be cool if we could control the scale as well of the Voronoi? We have this scale on the UV function, but that's not what it will do. As a matter of fact, we can copy this vector2 parameter and call it the dissolve tiling. This time the default values are going to be 1 for the X and Y. And the trick comes from multiply this vector2 parameter with the UV, input UV. Make sure it's multiply with the vector2. And here we go. Connect this to the UV input of the panning function, and we have the dissolve tiling where we can say, for example, X is 0.25 and Y is 0.2, and we get this really cool feeling. And then we have the dissolve amount that we can control however we want. There's a lot of things that I could show you, but this is essentially it when it comes to panning textures, controlling the tiling, dissolving another texture, controlling the color via the particle system, and so on. You can learn much more on my YouTube channel, where I have plenty of shader tutorials. They are done in Unity, but you can easily convert them to Godot or even to Unreal Engine. Now let's add a few more things. I want to show you a couple more things. We could indeed duplicate this, but let's actually practice how to create a particle system from scratch. So with right click in our VFX_Fire02, let's add the GPU Particles 3D. What do we need? A process material, new particle process material, a draw pass. What are we going to draw? Well, a quad. And then the material in geometry, material override, new shader material. The terminology is kind of weird because we are not going to create a new one. We are indeed going to reuse our Fireshade tutorial. I'm actually going to drop Flame02 for the main texture and then the Voronoi for the dissolve. And well, let's fix the gravity right away. Let's say something like 5. Let's play with the scale, like 0.75 for the minimum and 1.5 for the maximum, so it's a little bit random. Oh, let's actually create a curve for this scale curve texture, yes, where we add a key more or less around here. First key goes to 0 and last key goes also to 0, so it grows a little bit and then shrinks. Looking good. Yeah, let's increase the amount, the rate up here to 20. Alright, increase the lifetime as well to 1.2. Yeah, there's a few parameters you can play with, but let's use a different shape for this one. Let's use a sphere so they don't start at the same position. With a radius of 0.2, for example, it will add a little bit of randomness to where they spawn. And as you can see, they have all the same rotation. We can actually fix that down here in the angle. Let's say it's minus 360 and 360 for the maximum. But as you can see, nothing really changes. And the interesting thing in Godot, this isn't a fix on the particle system, it's a fix on the shader. Once again in the vertex function. But if you click on this drop down menu, we have particles. And as soon as we select it, our particles indeed have rotation now. Yeah, pretty cool. Now for the color, I'm actually going to use a color that I have saved on my swatches. It's pretty much a very similar color to the last one. It's useful, these swatches. Yeah, I'm gonna show you what damping does, by the way. It basically slows down the particle throughout its lifetime. Minimum of 0.5 and 1, yeah. So they start slowing down at the end. Right, so that's it for these flames. Let's rename it to flames because now let's use the Ctrl D to duplicate this one. For the smoke, I want to show you something when we duplicate particle systems. If we go to the process material, we have everything already set up, right? And if we start changing stuff, for example the color, let's set it to black. As you can see, it has also changed the flames color. Yep, which is weird if you ask me. Let me do a couple of Ctrl Z's here. Alright, so the way we fix this is either up here on the particle process material, this drop down arrow. We can say it's make unique, or down here in resource, it's local to scene. Depending on the situation, this may also help you. And now if you change the color to black, for example. Another interesting thing that is happening is they are overlapped. Sometimes the smoke is in front, sometimes the flames is in the back. Down here in sorting, we can say the offset is -1, and it will basically draw first the smoke and then the flames, and so on. Let me push this a little bit up, as well as the flames, so they don't intersect with this ground. And now let's make a few changes to the smoke, something quick. For example, we want them to live longer, 2.5 for the lifetime. We can also say they are bigger, for example, 1.5 and 2. Maybe a little bit bigger, 2.5 for the maximum. Cool. Let's increase the shape, the sphere, by the way, the radius, to 0.3, 0.4, so they are around the flames, kinda. But another cool thing that I want to show you is the gradients. There's also gradients here on color ramp. We can create a new gradient, and on this gradient we can say, for example, the first key, click here to control the color, it's white and the alpha is 0. This last key, can push it more or less around here, and for the last key click here and say the alpha is also 0, and here we go, we have fade in and fade out. Just gonna add a new key around here so it's visible for longer. Exactly. Another thing that I want to show you is another particle system for some floating particles. There's an interesting trick that I want to show you. So with right click in our VFX_Fire, I'm gonna add a child node, a new GPU Particles 3D, and rename it to Particles Floating. We need, remember, a process material, new particle process material, a draw pass, what are we going to draw, in this case a quad again, and for the geometry, a material override, new shader material, but this time not the shader that we have. Actually, let's duplicate the shader we have here, the shader tutorial, the fire shader tutorial, Ctrl D, and rename it to Simple Particles Shader Tutorial, for example. We want something from this shader, which is already done, and it's the basic setup of the main texture. Let's push it up here. Let's erase everything else, this one, this mix as well, and connect this to multiply with input color, and that's it. Let's go back to our particles floating, and now in shader of the material override we want to say quick load and select Simple Particle Shader Tutorial. It's basically a very basic shader, only for the main texture. Let's drag the flare 00 that also comes with a pack of textures for free that I've given you, and yes, they are all going down by default, as usual in Godot. So on the particle process material, let's say the gravity is 4. And they are intersecting with the other particles. Let's actually take care of that. Let's say the sorting down here is 1, so they go to the front of everything else. And then let's start from the top, yeah. So 50 for the amount, lifetime of, well, 2 seconds, more or less. We want some flying embers, some floating particles. They need to live a little longer. And then, well, the emission shape, yes, this one needs to be a sphere, a bigger sphere radius like 0.6, so they are everywhere. And for the scale, something very tiny, like 0.01 and 0.12. Yeah, very specific value. And now what I really want to show, let me just select the color, yeah. This one, exactly. What I really want to show is the turbulence, which is kind of a noise module. We'll add a really nice motion to the particles, and you can do a few things, a few interesting things with this. Let's say the noise scale is 5, and here we go. Particles floating everywhere. We have a quick fire going on with custom shader, with also custom textures. By the way, once again, if you want to learn more about textures, I have plenty of tutorials. Watch them, you will learn a bunch of stuff. And then you can apply it here in Godot. And yeah, that's it. I think I'm gonna do a few more tutorials with this if you guys are interested. So yeah, keep around, keep watching. By the way, if you want to support me on my Patreon, that would be awesome, so I can keep on giving you this free education. That will be super much appreciated. I made this all available on my Patreon's page, by the way. There's also an enormous library of visual effects on my Patreon, yeah. So, thank you for watching, thank you to my patrons for supporting me last month and for keep the channel going. And as usual, a quick shout out to the top tier patrons, which are Admin Lioncar, Alberto Sageras, Alexander Brazy, Alan Alstead, Alvman, Ape on Fire, Aviat Tobali, Brian Plem, Cyber Cradle, Daniel Schmidt, Dayaku, Diana Simonian, Jag Danrad, Jag Marks, Dylan Stottle, El Sheriff, Eric Orner, Frank Striker, Frosty40, George Michael Berg, Grub Lab, Guilherme Trindade, Jackson Doyle, Jarrett Billy, GYC, PC Miller, Aftop, Leon Nold, Lutuli, Matt Moran, Maciej Reznieski, Mike Bell, Nat Sims, Nikolai Yelnaz, Oitsk, Passy98, Pavan Venkat, Pradeep Sen, Radioactive Bullfrog, Revenant Games, Robert Ortinger, RVR, The Gap Year Project, Tom, Travis McCallum, Larry Suter, Will Hughes, Will Poilion, Shan, Dong Mokdong, Jing Pyeongling, and Minjae Kim. So that's it guys, thanks for watching my first Godot tutorial, I hope you have enjoyed and I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks, bye.